Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm very excited to bring you one of my all-time favorite videos to film, and that is an if you like this, you should also read that. This specifically is a horror edition, and I've done several of these before, so I'm going to have a playlist linked in the cards and in the description box. So if you enjoyed this video, you definitely have more to watch. I am going to be mentioning a few books that I've mentioned before, but I'm going to be pairing them with different books, so no repeats. And I gotta say, I'm really happy with the pairings I did here. Sometimes in the past, I felt like I was kind of stretching things in order to put two books together, but I'm looking at my list and I'm really happy with what I came up with. So hopefully you will agree with this, and let's get started. First, I want to recommend a book for those of you like myself that love Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. That, of course, is a story of a couple that move into an apartment building. They soon become pregnant and meet the neighbors. And while things seem good, there's just something a little bit off and something possibly wrong. And this is the book that you definitely want to go into without knowing too much about it if possible. And so along similar lines, I also want to recommend The Reaping by Bernard Taylor. This follows an artist who goes to an estate to paint a portrait of a young woman. He goes there and the people there just seem a little bit strange, a little bit off, but nothing seems particularly wrong, and so he goes about his work. Just like Rosemary's Baby, this is one that you want to go into without knowing too much, because both of them work on a few levels that I found to be quite similar. So first off, they're both examples of very quiet horror, so there isn't a lot of overt scares on the page, at least not in the beginning. Both of them are very slow paced, and instead it's just about creating an atmosphere where you know something just isn't quite right, but you don't know what that is. And I really enjoyed that subtle tension in both of these books. They are also somewhat older horror books, so they would both be considered vintage at this point. The Reaping is a little bit newer, but again, I think it was written around the early 80s or so. And so they kind of have a different flavor that you don't necessarily get with really new modern horror books. And I just love them. They're definitely ones that require some patience. You just have to go along. They're both fairly short, and they both have incredible payoffs with fantastic endings. So I definitely recommend Rosemary's Baby and also The Reaping. If you've read one, please go read the other. Next, I want to recommend a book for those of you that love the Goosebumps series. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about Night of the Living Dummy by R.L. Stine. This is a middle grade horror book that follows sisters that get ventriloquist dummies, and little do they know that they are possibly alive and go about doing some terrible things. Now, I read this book for the first time as an adult, and I gotta say that it didn't fully hold up as an adult reader looking for adult horror scares. And so because I didn't fully have the nostalgia for that book, it left me wanting more. And then shortly after, I went and read this other book, and this book was basically the book that I wanted R.L. Stine's Goosebumps to be, and that was The Toy Maker by Sergio Gomez. This follows a group of young boys that are living in a small town and have to fight the evil of the town, because you find out that there is an old toy maker who has built a companion, a doll, that is intended to keep him company. However, this doll has possibly come to life or has a personality of its own. And so the boys in this town have to go and save their friends and family. Now, this book has been described by other reviewers, so I can't take credit for it as Goosebumps for adults, but it completely holds up. It gave me all the feelings that I want to get from the R.L. Stine book, but it worked. So just to be clear, The Toy Maker is a book written for adults, and I just loved it. It gave me just the spooky vibes. It gave me the creepy doll experience I wanted, because while I didn't read the Goosebumps books growing up, I did watch the TV series, and so I was definitely familiar with Slappy, and so this book just gave me similar Slappy feels. It also, of course, plays into, like I said, the kids fighting the evil, which is something for those of you like myself that enjoy narratives surrounding stories like it. So I definitely recommend this one. It was just a lot of fun, and I feel like it's still a little bit more underhyped, so I would love more people to check it out. Next, I have to do a recommendation comparison for one of my all-time favorite horror books. That, of course, is The Changeling by Victor LaValle. This follows a man named Apollo who has a wife and a newborn son, and something terrible happens. His wife commits a terrible act, and Apollo basically has to go on an adventure and hopefully try to save his family. This is a book that I absolutely love for so many reasons, and a book that is similar to it, but of course not exactly the same, is The Good House by Tiana Reeve Dew. And this book follows a woman who is middle-aged. She is having a party at her family home on July 4th when something terrible happens, and she discovers that her teenage son has committed suicide. Now, both these books have similar setups in the way that they deal with parents having to experience terrible things happen to their families. I'm purposely being a little bit vague with The Changeling because it's not really part of the synopsis. But in the case of The Changeling, of course, his child is just an infant, while in The Good House, that boy is much older. So it deals with a different age of being a parent, both at the beginning and then later on. And so it definitely has a different focus, but at the same way, I think the idea of parent horror is just very relatable, regardless of if you have children yourself, or even, regardless of what age your children might be. And of course, I need to mention that both these books are written by Black authors, and so they really bring in their own experience and a lot of social commentary about the experience of being Black in America. So I absolutely love that. And if you're looking for, again, more diverse stories, these are two excellent examples that, again, take somewhat similar stories, take them in different directions, but the same way there was definitely things that tied them together. And in a way, they both have some fantastical, magical elements to them, which again is something I really enjoy when it comes to horror. I love when it leans into some dark fantasy. So highly recommend them both. If you haven't read one, get on it right away. Next, I want to talk about Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. This follows a woman and her young son who go off to a new town to start a new life. The son is struggling in school because he has some learning disabilities. However, something happens and he disappears and reappears a few days later, but when he comes back, he has changed. His disabilities are no longer there, and he seems to be hearing a voice that is telling him to do things, and he's overall just become very brilliant. This is a book that I definitely want to recommend to those of you that love supernatural horror. And along similar lines, I want to recommend The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry. This is set in a town where there are some grisly murders. The story itself follows two teenage girls that are best friends. However, their friendship is beginning to change. And just like Imaginary Friend, this one has a lot of supernatural elements to it. So when I was reading this one, I was immediately brought back to Imaginary Friend. There's a few different things that really tie the story together. Both are told over multiple perspectives, including younger characters, even though they both are adult novels. So they both have a little bit of that coming of age feel to them. I also like that in The Ghost Tree, just like in Imaginary Friends, there is a focus on the relationship between one of the children and their parents, and they are both in situations where they are in financial tough times, so they very much have to keep things on a very tight budget, and that kind of ties in to a lot of their struggles on a personal level. And while the books aren't exactly the same, I just feel like they had really similar vibes. And again, it's very rare for me to be reading one book and immediately think of another, even though the synopsis were quite different. So I highly recommend the two. I really feel like if you love one, there's a really good chance that you're gonna like the other. And I feel really good about this recommendation. So please go try them out and come back and let me know if I'm right. Last but definitely not least, I want to recommend a book for those of you that love Suffer the Children by Craig DeLuey. This, of course, is an apocalyptic novel set in a near future where all of the children around the globe die. However, soon enough, they rise again. However, they are changed. They are very apathetic and quiet, and in order to stay awake, they need to constantly have a source of blood. So this book follows the parents as they are willing to do anything in order to keep their children alive and well. This book definitely reminded me of the plot of another book, and that is Come to Dust by Bracken McLeod. This follows a man who has taken in his niece and is basically raising her as his own because his sister has gone off and run away. However, at the beginning of the story, something terrible happens and she dies. However, around the world, the children that have recently died are starting to come back to life, and possibly his niece is coming back to life as well. So I want to recommend these books together because, as you can probably tell, they do have similar synopsis of the idea of children dying and then coming back. But what I like about this pairing is that they both take the same concept but somewhat go in a different direction with them. So with Come to Dust, there is no aspect of blood, so it doesn't really lean into that vampirism. And I'll say that Suffer the Children was more of a large picture book, really looking at the apocalypse on a larger scale and getting to see how the different parents were affected by it. And instead, Come to Dust is a more intimate tale where it's more focused on this one specific father or surrogate father and his niece. So for me personally, I actually preferred Come to Dust, but it's just personal preference. I do tend to like more of those intimate stories, but I know a lot of people love Suffer the Children. So if you want to take a story that again is similar, but then it goes in a different direction, it's definitely not a copycat. I don't even know which one came out first. I would highly recommend Come to Dust. I feel like it's very underhyped and was just a very enjoyable, entertaining story. It seems like a weird way to describe it for how grim the subject matter is, but it was absolutely immersive, held my attention, and it was just such a page turner. Of course, both these books deal heavily with parent grief and the lengths that they're willing to go to protect their children. And I think that again is such a relatable topic. So I really do think that these books work together really well. So that is it for this video, and please give me some feedback if you've read any of these pairings already, if you agree or disagree. Hopefully you agree, but that's okay if you don't. I would also love to hear from you if you have your own pairings, books that you think work better with one than the other. I love to get these recommendations, and again, I just find these videos so much fun to film and also so much fun to watch. So I really hope that you enjoyed it as well. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, hit that notification bell. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror as well as thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, and otherwise I will, talk to you again soon. Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.